welcome to this session. So this session is brought to you by GreyHatBeard. So we are GreyHatBeard, or parts of GreyHatBeard, which is a podcast that we do every couple of weeks. So you can follow the podcast on Twitter. My name's Alan Eardley. I'm head of modern workplace at a UK consultancy called CPS. I have a blog, and I also run the London Power Platform user group with a couple of other people, and I'm a Microsoft MVP.
And my name's Kevin McDonnell. I am the Grey of GreyHatBeard. I'm solutions architect at CPS as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Kev McDonk. I blog at McD79. Got a bit of a series going on with knowledge management. So if you're interested in Project Cortex or any other knowledge management, do follow along there. You'll see a big gap there because I don't run a user group and I'm not an MVP yet, but hopefully there'll be a gap filled in with more things as we come along. But certainly GreyHatBeard's a big one. Modern workplace, we talk about all things Microsoft 365, covering the latest news of what's been happening. It's a great way to wrap up on what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, and then pick up a subject. So we've gone through books, we've talked about security, we've had Peter, the moderator, on the show. So please do give it a listen. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all your podcast providers, or just go to greyhatbeard.com. Back to you, Al.
Excellent. Right, so what are we going to cover today? So we're going to just go through quickly what the problem is, the solution. We've got some demos of entitlements, and then we're going to cover off some of the benefits. So without further ado, what is the problem that we are trying to solve here? I guess one of the key things is the interface for all of this. So how we actually work as different roles. So what we're going to do, we're going to work through. So I'm going to play the administrator, and Kevin is going to kick off as the user.
So we all have users who join the organization, and I would have thought most of you have been a new user. Join your new company, and you've hopefully been using Teams, and you've said, right, what should I have access to? What are the teams that I want to get on there? What SharePoint sites should I have access to that are either Teams as well or separate for that? And then even the more basic question, who do I actually go and speak to find out where I get permissions? What should I have permissions to? How do I get those? Once I've requested those, who approves them? And if you're lucky, you've got a nice intranet or digital workplace you can go to that helps guide you on there. Maybe you've got some very friendly people who help with the service desk that you can go and ask those questions. But it's always that introduction bit, knowing where to get to, who to get the information from. And if we look at this time of COVID, you can't sit at your desk and turn to the person next to you that maybe has brought you in. They aren't sat there. Hopefully you've got Teams and you can go and speak to them, but it's just that little bit harder. So what the entitlements gives you is a way to try and help with that new user dilemma. If you want to jump to the next slide, Al. And when you think about it, it's not just that as new starter. So yes, when you start, you want to tell people I need the same permissions as John or Joan that you'll know that you're going to be working with, and you want to make sure that they're permanently allocated as a new joiner. There'll be certain things that maybe you're in HR and you need access to all the HR systems that you'll get from the beginning. But if you're working at a matrix organization, then you're not just going to be sat within there, you're going to be working on different projects. And as you start on those projects, there's often times that you want access to different systems or access in different ways to systems. And that may be a temporary assignment. It may just be for the duration of that project, however long or short it is that you need that access. So setting that up as well. And you may also be working with external users. If you're working with a project team, you may be working with a consultancy, or you are a consultant, you'll be working with your clients on there. So you need to get access there as well. And then beyond the changing projects is also actually changing your role completely. You may be moving within HR, within your IT where you work, or you may be actually changing to a completely different department. And you need to take away the permissions that you did have and assign new permissions as well to make sure that you're not leaving any risk open to what you have and what has been set up. So that's your experience as a user. But what does that look like for administrator? Back to you, Al.
So as an administrator, I need to know what permissions to give people. So when we get that new starter, I need to understand what they need access to. How are they going to actually do their job? So when I start that process and I get maybe a request come through and it might say, yes, somebody's joining this particular team, I need to understand what they should have access to. So how do I find that out? Do I need to speak to their line manager and ask them and say, actually, who is it that you want to use as a template for this person? Do I ask them based on, if it's a matrix management organization, or which projects are they running? Which projects are they working on? What do they need to have access to? I don't have necessarily an easy way to understand that. And I don't really want to impose a new way of working on all of the owners of those permissions. I want that to be as easy as possible for people to actually be able to define what those permissions are and to allow them to basically allow me to delegate out that ownership of those permissions. The other thing is, I don't necessarily know when they should be reviewed. I don't know when people stop working on projects. And I think very few organizations have an attitude towards permissions where they say, actually, you're going to start working on this project. It's going to be for a period of time. And then we're going to review that during that project, maybe once the project is completed, and then we may revoke permissions afterwards. So that whole life cycle management for permissions is something that a lot of organizations don't actually think about at the moment. And that's primarily because there haven't been necessarily the tools that have been easy to use and easy both from an administrative perspective to set up and also to be able to delegate out the ownership of those, and then also for the users to actually use it. So it's always been very much, as an administrator, I need to understand what I need to grant to people, and that usually comes in the form of a request to say, oh, I need the same permissions as John over there, or I'm now working on this project, I need the new permissions to that project. So as an administrator, it can be really challenging for me to understand who needs the permissions, how long they need them for, and who's approving those permissions.
And I think one thing, sorry to jump in now because I forgot to mention something before. Many of you may be thinking, again, this is nice and easy. You can use Microsoft 365 groups, put people in those groups, boom, done. And that's your team. That's linked all with your team, links with your planner and the other things. But what we're also talking about is we know that even with the best will of Microsoft's world, there are permissions outside of the Microsoft space. People can be using Salesforce, Concur, all sorts of other permissions as well. And this allows you to bring that world into the same experience. So it's not just about Microsoft groups. It can be wider than that as well. Indeed.
And it's further complicated when you do start working with external partners. So a lot of what we now see, especially now that we're all moving towards using Teams and to be working online, is that external collaboration. How we share content is one thing, but how we actually invite users in and give them permissions to access our teams so that we can do true collaboration in terms of managing teams, working together. As a consultancy, we work with a lot of different clients. I have access to, I don't know how many different tenants. Now, I'm willing to bet you that most of those organizations don't necessarily have controls in place to say, actually, they've given me permissions to their tenant. Now, how do they track? Do I still need permissions to that tenant? Am I still working on that project? Is my organization still engaged with their organization as a partner? And this is further compounded by the fact that if we're working with a partner, then we're controlling who from our organization is working with that partner. So we might say, well, we've got a new starter. They're perfect. They've got the perfect skill set to really support one of our clients. So therefore, we want to get them involved with that client. We then need to go to the client and say, actually, Kate has joined. Can we get her to have access to your tenant, please? What we want to do with entitlements is to actually allow us to publish those permissions out so that external partners have as easy an experience to manage who they want to have working with us as an organization. And also we then get the same life cycle there. So as an administrator, how do I know who has access? I want to know basically who has. At the moment, that means I have to go into the different teams and the groups and to see who's been granted those permissions. I don't necessarily know when their access should be revoked. So, you know, I want to have that life cycle management as an administrator to know that I'm not leaving holes open where people still have access to my organization, and I'm not actually tracking them and monitoring them. And certainly if I'm, you know, if I go through any sort of auditing, I want to have a tool that I can actually demonstrate, well, who has access, what is the life cycle, and how is their permission being removed. And then validating their permission. You know, I want to be able to say, I know that I've delegated ownership of the granting of permissions to this person. Maybe that's the department head, maybe it's the project manager, maybe it's a team lead. Depending on what level of permissions, I want to be able to demonstrate who has ownership of that. And as an administrator, I have the tools at my disposal to actually revoke and remove, but I don't want to have to do that all the time. So there's a lot of challenges there that organizations have to say, how do I allow people to have access to my my sets of permissions? How do I track them? How do I remove them at the end? And how can I demonstrate that to auditors? So what is the solution? So the solution here is part of Azure AD, and it's called Entitlements. So entitlements, you may have come across access reviews, but access reviews, this is one step up. This is actually saying we want to have a full life cycle to be able to manage permissions, to be able to group them together into catalogs. So grouping a set of resources together and say, all of these resources, we want to be able to publish permissions, and then we want to be able to have organizations externally where we can actually say they are trusted organizations. So we will allow those users in. And then what we do here is we create what's called an access package. And that is a package of rights and permissions to various things. So that, and we'll go through this in the demos, but that an access package consists of Microsoft Teams, it consists of SharePoint sites and applications as well. So if you're authenticating through Azure AD, so we can
it's always nice when Microsoft actually calls things to what they are. So it is a package of access, you know, does what it says on the tin there, which is great.
It is, and we can publish those access packages. What we mean by that is we can actually distribute them to certain groups within the organization. So whether we've got maybe a finance group and maybe we've got a security group that's controlling that, we can publish a set of access packages to that finance group and allow users to browse those, see what they are entitled to request access to, and actually make a request. Importantly, as you'll see in the demos, we then have approval processes in place. So we have the controls in place to say, is this user legitimate when they make this request? Yes. Okay, let's go through an approval process. And then we have the process of reviewing that. So once it's been granted, we can actually go through all of the steps again and go, actually, do they still need access? And then we can automatically revoke access based on the responses to those reviews.
So as a user, you can go, and as we talked about, there is a central place. There is a My Access place where you can go and view what entitlements, and you can request from that catalogue of items. And once they're approved, you can get access. And as a manager, as the person who maintains either a project or a particular system, or maybe you're within finance, you want to be able to set and agree any access to those systems. As a manager, you can go to that same place and see those requests and manage those in one there. So it gives you that end user experience, whether it's requesting or approving those as well. It doesn't just need to go through a central IT system to be able to sign those things off. And again, where you have those reviews that Al talks about, I think that's such an important part from the life cycle. Many people think about the requests at the beginning and making sure you get read things at the end, but making sure that the review access to confirm that things are still correct is a really important point to pick up as well. And that is for the manager and for the user, for you to check that you still have the permissions that you should have. That life cycle is really key to this as well.
Okay, so we're going to go through several demos here. I might just point out that we'll be talking over videos because we can't really do this in real time. So it is I think it's the first time we've both done this in terms of talking over videos. So please forgive us if there are any gaps. But what we're going to show you is essentially how you, as an admin, how you create an access package. So we'll talk about catalogs, creating a catalog of resources, how you create the access package. We will show you as a user, as a manager, what that whole end-to-end process looks like. So with that, we're going to go into the demo. So the first demo is creating a catalog. So essentially what we have here is we're in Azure AD, and we're going to go into the catalogs, and we're going to actually create a catalog. So a catalog is a set of resources. So we're going to give it a name, and this is the group of resources that we want to actually be able to publish access packages in relation to. So we can enable it or disable it, and we can add external users. So we can choose whether this is an internal package or an external package of resources that we want to publish. When we come into a catalog, we then want to add resources into it. So we get messages saying that there are no resources. So when we come in, we have three types of thing that we want to actually add. So we have groups and teams, which is Office 365 groups, Microsoft Teams. And when we come in here, we have a list of all of the groups and teams in our organization. So in this case, we're setting this up for the PMO. So we're going to take a project and a program. So we select those, we add those in, and we can see that those are teams. We're then adding in an application. So the applications that Azure AD recognizes as being used to authenticate through Azure AD. So that's why we can control them here. And then we have SharePoint sites. So we may not have everything as a team. So in this case, we've got a communication site for the PMO. So we want to add that in as well. So what we're basically doing is we're selecting all of the different resources that we actually need to have together. And that makes up essentially our catalog of assets that we can publish. So we have the groups and the teams, the applications, and the SharePoint sites. And once we add that in, that's then created, and we have our PMO site. PMO catalog. So the next thing I want to demonstrate is essentially how we create an access package. So from within that catalog. So we're going to go through and create a new package. Now we need to consider when we're naming it around who we're actually publishing this to. So we could have multiple access packages related to a particular catalog. So in this case, we're going to create PMO members. So we're going to say this is internal, and you'll see why it's important as we go through the other packages that we might be creating. And then we're choosing a catalog, and that basically means that we can have this access package related to one catalog. We've got to remember here that actually part of this is to do with how we actually label these so that they make sense when we actually view things. So when we come through and we're choosing the resources, we've got the catalog resources available. If we check the box at the top, we'll see everything and we can add other things in. But what we really want to be doing is to be managing this with catalogs, because the catalogs we can actually publish out to other users as well. So again, we've got the different resources that we've already added into that catalog. So we're adding all of these in to this access package. Now the difference here when we get to this point is that rather than just adding the resources in, we have the roles. So we're actually choosing what role we want to actually allocate as part of this access package. So we can choose that we're going to have members, DevOps has got default access, and then our SharePoint site has visitors, for example. So we're really choosing what role we want to have as well as the resources. And we don't have to have all of the resources. We could have a subset of the resources. So once our access package has all of that information, we want to choose who can actually request it. So in this scenario, we're going to go for users in our directory. So we've got specific users and groups here. We can choose all members, excluding or including guests. So if we're thinking about departmental groups, which we're using as an example here, we then can look for a security group and say, actually, we want to only publish this access package to members of that group. Now, this is really important because it means that we're selecting the users who are going to actually view it, and it's quite granular then. We're then coming into the approval. So we can suggest that we want to have approval required. We can add a justification, and then we can choose who do we want to have the first approver. Now this comes down to who should know that that person needs to have access. So we can have the manager, line manager. It'll automatically pick up the line manager from Azure AD. We can put a fallback in there. So if the line manager isn't available, then we can add somebody else in there as a fallback. And basically what we're doing here is we're saying we've got an approval step. We've got a number of days during which that approval process is open. And we can ask for justification as well. So why do I need access? And then we can say, what is taking place to forward it on to an alternate approver if necessary. So if there's an alternate approver, we can just forward it on, and then we can enable this. Now, part of this is that the fact that we can have multiple steps. So whilst we know the manager might know what they're doing, actually, if we're doing that matrix management, we might be saying we want to add other approvers in for a second step. So that might be a project manager, it might be a department head, it might be someone that the line manager knows that that team member needs access, but the second step is I own the content, so therefore I'm going to let that user in. So it's really important to understand that we've got those two steps to really make this a viable approval process to allow this to take place at multiple levels. Now, sometimes we need to understand a bit more about the user, why they're asking for permissions. So we can actually add in custom fields in here. So this is really useful when maybe the second step approver doesn't understand the detail of the person and why they're requesting access. So it might be, what project are you working on? We've got different formats. So we've got the short text, the long text, multiple choice. This is really trying to capture any other information that is needed to enable the approvers to approve or reject the request.
And hopefully not War and Peace and without typos, but otherwise it's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, demos, they've got to have typos, don't they? So putting all of this in, this really is to make sure that the approver has the information that they need to actually approve the request. So hopefully we're going to move on to the next step. This is where
it's worth noting on there, you can see the localization. So if you are multi-language, I know we have a lot of European viewers, you can add the multi-language within there as well for those questions.
Absolutely, yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. I knew I was going to catch that. So when we then get past that, we're looking at the life cycle. So we've got the approval request, and we've got that life cycle. So the life cycle is now, what do we do after that permission is granted? Do we want to actually review the access package and have it expire? So we could set, as people do with contractors and external people, it's going to expire after a number of days. We could say on a particular date. So if we were expecting a project to end on a particular date, or we can say never, just leave it open. We can also allow users to extend their access. And this is really, this can be a self-certifying, well, I still need access to this, so I'm going to provide a justification and it's going to carry on. So you've got an auditable step, but you can also go through that whole approval process again. Okay, so I'm requesting access be extended, but I'm going to justify it with the reasons, and it's going to go through those approval steps so that everybody knows that actually I do still need access, and they are actually granting that for me. We then also have the access reviews. Now the access reviews is, rather than having a particular date or an expiry date, access reviews gives us a continuous approach to saying, well, actually every quarter or every month or every year, we're going to review access. So it gives us that fallback option to say, we might set the expiration to be never, but have the access reviews going through. And basically we're saying who's going to review this, and they need to actually come in and say, yes, this person still needs that access. And if they don't say that, then the access will be revoked. So there's two options here. We've got the expiration, set a date, and then allow us to actually review it at that point, or to just have a rolling regular check to say, do we still need this person to have access to it? So there's multiple ways that we can manage the life cycle here. It does mean that we need to understand what burden we're putting on the owners, but that shouldn't be too much of a burden, because they're basically making sure that everything remains secure. So when we review it, we can see the name. So remember, PMO, member, internal. We're identifying who we're publishing it to, and we're identifying what permissions we're giving. We've then got what the approval process looks like, and then we've got the lifecycle management as well. So we've got all of the steps to really give us complete control over how we're delegating ownership of this and the approval process out. And once this access package is created, then we end up with essentially this package is visible to the users. So we can see that there, it's now there, PMO, internal. Now, one of the things that, I need to move to the next demo now. So I was going to say, one of the things
just quickly, there's a question from Jakob saying, is the preview show before to add custom questions a public or private preview? I assume that's a private, that's for the administrator to preview that before making it available in the catalogue.
Absolutely, yeah, that's correct. So let me move on to the next one. So the next one is external users. So we talked about one of the challenges is I don't know as a partner who you are going to have working on my account. So therefore I don't know who you need to have access to my systems. So let me go through this, because this is really where, when we created that first access package, we said internal directory. Now, when I come through and I look at the access packages now, I can see that I've got PMO owner, external and internal for members. So these are giving different permissions and they're being published to different people, and they have different review processes. So the owner one is giving different permissions, but the external one actually has a different approval process. So what I'm doing here is coming into this policy, into this access package, and because I want to look at the policies, I'm going to click into the policy. I am going to click into the policy, and what I'm going to see when I get in there, so it defines it as an initial policy. It always gives it a default name. When I come in here and come to edit, what I can see here is the name of the policy, but I can see that actually this is users not in my directory. So this is explicitly being published to external people, and I've got a connected organization. As part of that connected organization, I'm giving it a domain, and I'm saying I want to associate an internal and an external sponsor with that organization as well. And that basically is me nominating an external party to say, you are the person who I am expecting to be able to review any requests that are being made for this particular access package. And I can have an internal user as well, and they can then do that second step. So my first approval step is the external sponsor, and I've got a fallback in there. It looks very much the same, but actually I've got the additional option of external sponsor for that particular connected organization. So it's very useful to be able to nominate those external sponsors and be able to say, this is the person who is going to approve, because you know who you want to have working on my account. And this should just drop down to show the second step of approval as well. It should do in a second. So I'm learning new things, like I can't see where I am in the video at the moment.
This is the GreyHatBeard one where it expects us to waffle on a lot more than we do. So there we go.
No, that's no. Okay. Oh, demos. Gotta love demos, even when they're pre-recorded. So hopefully that gives you the view. I can certainly publish a video on YouTube after this if necessary to show that. So let's move on to the user experience. So I'm going to hand over to Kevin, and I'll start the video, Kev.
Fantastic, thank you. So again, here we're on the admin screen, but for the user, you want them to have access to the portal. So if you go into the access packages, if we go back to that PMO member internal, you'll see there's a My Access portal link, and that is a link to that specific access package for the user. And you can copy that and you can put it wherever you need to put it. So if we, for example, have a team that you're working on, you can add it as a tab there or a link with a team. You could put it within your SharePoint site and make it available there, whether it's your intranet, your digital workplace, making sure that that is available if you want to go to that specific access package itself. And you can see the list of groups, teams, SharePoint sites in there. You can also get to the list of all access packages that was still available, and you can put that link to the myaccess.microsoft.com for your tenant and see all the different access packages that you can drill into and expand and see, again, get that detail on there. And then you can click on the plus to request access, and those questions that Al configured previously are there, so you can see that that option there. So you put the text in there to say which project you're working on. So this is obviously a Teams Fest demo project, the most important project there. Is it temporary? Yeah, just need this for the duration of there, and a justification that you can add in it. Is it for a specific period? So you could say yes, and maybe put the start and end date for Teams Fest, but we want you to continue having access. So we'll say no and put it in there for as long as you want, with those reviews and places in there. Nice toast message, so you can actively see that things have been added, but it's dynamically shown that request history on the screen there as well. And if we go back and we can flip back to that request history and see that you've put it in there, and you can see that you've got pending approval. You can see when it was requested. You can even go in and view the details for that actual request. Now, if we go over and have a look at the manager's experience, so again, the manager can also see the request, the access packages that are available, that they have the details there, but there's an approvals tab there. So we can see that Gurney Halleck has requested on October the 3rd, and that actually there's a due date for that access request to go in, and you can go and have a look at the details. You again can see when it's due. You can expand that, and we can see the answers to those questions. So which project? It's that Teams Fest demo. The justification for it, is it a temporary assignment on there? We can see the answers to all the things that we've asked them to fill out the details. For those who do use that, obviously for many of us, we'll just go, yeah, all good, provide a reason. You can see we've got a mandated reason, so you do actively have to think about it somewhere. We'll be using Gurney as a guinea pig, the guinea pig, you could say. Just made that up, that was awful. And again, we got those toast message, and you can see straight there from the approvals, updated on the screen, approved. You will notice you can tick that approve and deny at the bottom, so you can do a few in one go. So if you've got a few people put those requests in, you can see that that is there. And if we go and look, you can see that we've got the first stage approval. So what's that name? Turfir Hawat has approved the first stage, but it's still got that pending from the second stage. So it's the first approver. It's one of two. So I know as a user, I've still got someone else who needs to go and approve that, and I can see who that is. So we've always got the capability to chase. If I log back in, I think this is logged in as Al now, as a second approver. I can go in and again see all those details, see the same piece that's taken place. I know that it's already been approved because it wouldn't come to me. But if I wanted to check and see who approved that, maybe I don't trust some people to approve. Maybe others I'm quite happy, yep, they would have done the due diligence on there. So I can say, yes, I'm happy on there. Provide reason is required. Probably need to put a proper reason in there, not just copy and paste stuff, and just say that it is reviewed and approved, and click on approve. And now Gurney, yep, has been successfully approved. Member of the PMO internal, has access to those teams, has access to the site. I think we'll flip over and just bring the request history so we can see that the status is delivering. So it does sometimes take a little bit of time for the request to go through and actually set all the different permissions, especially if you've got an awful lot of things on there. Just do the classic refresh until it starts working. Otherwise, if we flip over to Teams, great. We can see that things have been added there. We've added the AE projects, the AE programs that were those teams and groups that we talked about. They've been added into Teams. I've got access to those. Still got the wiki in there. Generally, we try and take those off, but otherwise, if you haven't, they're all in there, available. Got access to all those different systems that are needed, and I can go back and I can still see the package there, still delivering. But if I view, I can see the different history of things. I can see the approvers. Even with recorded demos, we do lose a bit of patience at refreshing the screen too much, but you'll see that status update as it goes through for the different elements there. And I think that's all completed now, hasn't it, Al?
I think so.
We did have one question there in terms of licensing using entitlements management. It became a lot more intriguing as the MAU pricing for external AD users and first 50,000 users being free exits preview.
Yeah, I will talk about the licensing. Yeah, because so I guess so that's with the demo. So the licensing is absolutely key, and I've got a slide with some information around the licensing right at the end. So I guess to summarize what we've tried to show you, and it is quite a challenge showing everything in detail, because there's a lot to this capability. Entitlements really does provide so many benefits. What we've really tried to go through is, I guess, how we can group together different permissions. So with those catalogs, we can put those different resources together in one catalog of resources that might be applicable to a project, a department, a job role, and then within those catalogs to be able to allow those access packages to control the permissions you have to each of those resources, and then publish them to particular groups, so that the users can come along and do a self-service request and say, I need to have access to this particular project, and it's intuitive. If you name all of the packages, it's intuitive for the users to actually know where to go and to select the permissions that they need. Having those multiple steps of approval in there means that you've got the line manager, and then you've got a secondary step in there to allow proper approval processes to take place. And obviously they're all audited, they're all demonstrable in terms of managing them and being able to show people how they actually work, when those approval packages have been approved and the access has actually been granted. The inclusion of those external organizations, so those trusted organizations to say we have external sponsors, means that you offload a lot of that understanding of what people, that first level of approval, those external sponsors should know who needs to be approved, and then you can have that secondary internal process as well. So it really starts to remove some of the complexity of that request process, and make sure that it is a completely audited, automated process from start to finish. So it does make life a lot easier once it's all set up, and it does make it easier for users and managers without the need for administrators to say, I don't know what permissions you need, I don't know what permissions you have, and when they should be removed. So it does simplify a lot of the control over the whole life cycle. Now, I think, as somebody asked in the chat, the licensing, the L word, it's always painful, isn't it, to talk about licensing. And the licensing is changing with the way that users are being, the external users are being managed as well. So I've tried to distill this down into who needs a license, and it is an Azure Active Directory Premium P2 license that the users need. So starting with the internal users, your internal users, if they can request an access package, they need a license. If you don't publish any access packages to them, then they don't need a license. But if they can request it, they need a license. Member and guest users who request an access package need a license. So this isn't where so with the guest users, it's slightly different. We still have the rules in there to say that the proportion of users, guest users to internal users are in place. But if you have 50 users on your tenant, but you have 1,000 users, guest users who are coming into your tenant, you will start to have to buy licenses for those guest users. So it's important to be able to do those calculations and understand. I'll put a link in, I'll put it out on Twitter actually, about the licensing that's got some really good scenarios for how you work through this, these calculations. Members and guests who approve, so if they are in any way involved in the approval process, then they need to have a license and directly assigned. So we didn't really cover it off in the demos, but as well as being able to publish an access package for self-service, so for those users to actually request access, both internally or guests, we can also leave it and not make it publicly accessible in terms of the self-service and only do the directly assigned. So we can basically just say we want specific people and we will manage that from an administrative perspective. Very useful if you're talking about IT, where you don't necessarily need people to go in and request access. But yes, so that's also there. So it is a bit of a challenge, the licensing, but there are some clear guidelines based on who can access a request, who can request an access package, who is involved in the process as well.
So Alan, in terms of those users who can request an access package, does it block them from being able to view things if they haven't got a license, or are you opening yourself up to an audit concern?
You're opening yourself up to an audit concern more than anything else. So this is one of those tenant level things that once you set it up, you just need to make sure that you are licensing appropriately. And I think it sounds more complicated than it is. They're trying to make this much easier to manage in terms of how you use the licensing and what calculations you do. I've not seen anything that makes it easy to get all the data out based on who you're publishing to, in terms of who you're publishing those access packages to, but it is something that you could work out if you're pulling all the data down.
And a question from Nikki Chappell: if a team owner directly adds guests to their team, then there is a way to link that into the entitlement packages?
So no, you would be bypassing this process. So this process, if you directly add people in, then this process would be completely bypassed, and it wouldn't kick in to say actually the owner has added people in. You want the whole thing going, all of the access management going through this process, rather than manually adding people in and out.
And I'd certainly need to check. I don't know if you know, but could you run reports to say here is the number of people that are guests, and here are the people that are in the entitlements package? I guess there'd be a way to pull that out.
So there is
review that as well.
Yeah, I think some of the questions that you might ask in terms of what are the total number of people who have access to a particular site, you could pull that information out. It might take a little bit of work, but certainly you can pull that out, and there is reporting within the Active Directory identity governance section to say how many people have got access, how many people have been revoked. So all of that is visible against both catalogs and access packages.
And a great point from Jakob is that you could use access reviews to solve that, because then you would see where people are missing from that. So yeah, really good point to bring that in as well.
And access reviews.
Using that, Nikki.
Yeah, access reviews are also available. So I think it's the earlier scenario that said if you add a user into your team. So there is access reviews is also available as a separate option within the identity governance section within Azure AD, and that is set up against a particular Office 365 group. So you could be using access reviews to actually just do that periodic check to say who should still have access, and that will revoke access to anybody. So you can set that up to say just review guest users, just review internal users, and that will revoke access, but it will only revoke access to that given group. Whereas when it's used within entitlements, we're managing access to multiple different groups, sites, and applications. So that's why it's slightly different. Any other questions?
So not seeing many more questions pop out. I think what I think is interesting in licensing, it's a P2, so we're not talking fully 5. It can be a lot of money, absolutely, but when you compare with, you know, similar packages that you'd have to bring in and install and manage separately, whether it's on-premise or SaaS, I think there's definitely some value that can be seen from that. So it's not something you get straight away, but definitely something that's worthwhile as well.
And so with that, we'll go to the obligatory slide. So please do give us feedback. It helps us. It helps Teams Fest as well. So let us know how we've done. And I think this is it's a really intriguing area. It's complex, but there's so much potential with entitlement. So I mean, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Kevin. And obviously, please try and listen to GreyHatBeard. We do cover security. We've had various people on, so we've had Peter on a couple of times. We cover security and all things modern workplace. So please do give it a listen and let us know how we've done.
If you'd like to appear on the show, give us a shout as well. We're very much like to hear from people, get others on there, and if there's a particular subject you want to cover, give us a shout via Twitter. And yeah, we'll see if we can get you on.